Welcome to our second Strengthening Literacy Power and Partnership stakeholder event. I'm joined by some familiar faces, Superintendent Kent Scribner and Mayor Betsy Price, and we're coming to you live from C.C. Moss Elementary School. For everyone watching, we're sitting 6 feet apart and following all the school's safety protocols. It might not appear that way on video, but want to make sure that you know that we are following all the safety protocols necessary here at the school. A big thank you to all of our supporters, volunteers, and partners who are joining us via Zoom today. A special welcome to the Reed Fort Worth board members, staff, and our elected officials. Your support is critical to our success, and we appreciate you share the impact of our work in the strategic priorities as we move forward. All right, let's get down to business.
Let's do it.
The purpose of today's event is to talk about action. This is not going to be a conversation about ideas or what we could do or brainstorming great solutions for kids. Today, we are going to be centered on how we put those ideas into creative solutions for kids. And one theme that we really hope to lift up today is that recovery for our children academically requires our community-wide support. It's a community-wide responsibility with the organizations Mayor Price, myself, and Superintendent Scribner represent, but also as citizens of Fort Worth, that we have to come together for solutions and that are children-centric if we want to get our kids back on the path to academic and learning recovery. And we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box. We want to create a dialogue here. I can't promise we're going to have time for all of the questions, but we'll address a few of them at the end. Mayor Scribner, I know that we were talking before.
No way.
No way.
No.
She looked at us backwards.
No, I'm sorry.
I might trade jobs with you on occasion.
As we were getting the behind the scenes before we got started, we were talking about all the bright spots that we have to look forward to right now. Things certainly have seemed to take a turn for the better as vaccine dissemination is more broad, even down to kids as young as 12. Fort Worth ISD and districts across Texas continue to remain some of the first districts in our nation that provide an in-person option for kids all year. And then there are so many more bright spots. Every month, Reed Fort Worth features an elementary school whose data shows that they are getting tremendous success despite the odds. And these bright spot articles are some of the most popular views on our website and social media. I think it just goes to show that everybody likes a real life champion story. The most recent school that we covered was Oakhurst Elementary. They were featured in our bright spot this month for their attendance rates. Despite having a high percentage of kids who are academically disadvantaged, they're just rocking it with their attendance and competitive with more affluent elementary schools in our district. And we're sitting here at Christene Moss Elementary School because they're another bright spot. Reed Fort Worth is focused on improving attendance in our elementary schools because attendance is so correlated to literacy success. And we started the Don Babers Reading Reward Program this year, which is named in honor of Reed Fort Worth's late board member, friend, and ardent champion of kids in our community. And we monitor the improved attendance rates at 26 elementary schools across Fort Worth ISD. And every 6 weeks, we award 4 schools who had the top improved attendance rate. And why we picked improved attendance is because we asked our principals what they wanted to celebrate for kids, and they wanted to celebrate kids striving for better. And so the winners of those 4, one of the winners is here at C.C. Moss Elementary School. And the others include McDonald's, Oakhurst, and Dillow Elementary School. And every child in each of these schools, because of their school was a winner, receives a book that they get to take home for themselves that was selected by Fort Worth ISD teachers, and so that it is grade and developmentally appropriate for every kid that's getting it. Okay, you guys, I'm turning it over to you, Superintendent Scribner, Mayor. What are some of the bright spots that you've been seeing this year, Mayor?
Oh gosh, in a time when there are so many negatives, there's been lots of bright spots. I'd say the way the communities pull together, the work between Reed Fort Worth, the school district, and the city have just been phenomenal. But one of the really bright spots has been vaccinations. The facts that vaccinations have come along and are really putting us back into more of a normal area than we were. And one of the priorities has been vaccinating teachers. We've worked really hard to get vaccines into teachers. We've done several pop-up clinics that focused on teachers getting vaccinated. I know some of them thought early on it probably wasn't fast enough, but we worked it as quick as we could. And Cook's Children's Hospital donated 6,000 vaccines for teachers because, as Rick Merrill said, it just was the right thing to do. And clearly it was, because people realize we have to get our kids back in school. The other one has been to focus on broadband. The city dedicated $5 million for broadband. The schools dedicated a lot of money from their bond election, and we've been working with them. And for us at the city, we're targeting on the 5 neighborhoods that are part of our neighborhood improvement program: Rosemont, Ash Crescent, Stop 6, Northside, and now Como, because we know for a fact that these kids won't succeed. And nothing has brought more light on things than the pandemic on broadband and how critical it is for our kids to succeed that they have broadband. It's as critical as we used to say, a big chief tablet and a number 2 pencil. I'm showing my age now, aren't I?
Yes. Yeah, it is a basic needs supply.
It's
at
like
school.
having Crayolas and manila paper for your first day of school.
And Superintendent Scribner, it's hard to walk through the hallways here today and not be impressed by all the terrific things happening in these classrooms. What are some of the bright spots of this year that have stood out to you?
Well, first, I would say collaboration, as is with anything successful here in Fort Worth. We work together. In Fort Worth ISD, as Mayor Price pointed out, our partners on the broadband expansion. We've partnered with the city and the county with regard to COVID testing and vaccinations. We served over 1 million meals during the pandemic to our families during initially the stay-at-home order, and then moving forward for those students who selected virtual learning. But collaboration with everyone from the United Way, Texas Health Resources, Tarrant Food Bank, Child Care Associates, and I would say something very positive from my perspective. It really reinforced what we're doing with regard to our school performance framework from an equity lens, putting more resources in the same neighborhoods that the mayor talked about, in the same zip codes and same schools for those students who are in the greatest need. Unfortunately, the pandemic had a disproportional effect. It hit our low-income populations, our students of color, our language minority populations. So we think it's just the right thing to do to continue to invest in those students with the greatest need. We saw tremendous leadership from the mayor, from the county judge, and from many others across our community. The resilience of our teachers, staff, students, allowing us to reimagine really what school will look like. I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but expanding the school day, expanding the school year, having a summer school program that is not the stigma of students who are behind, but our summer school this year is going to be for everyone. An all-day program, literacy and mathematics in the morning, enrichment in the afternoon, but even those enrichment lessons will have literacy in each one, and mathematics where appropriate. So we're excited about using this pandemic as an opportunity to not go back to the way we did things before, but actually improve.
Lots of great points that you made there, and we'll come back to some of them, but we can't go any further without recognizing one of the huge bright spots that I know both of you agree with me on is our teachers this year. And I'm sure every teacher is thinking about that last day of school, which is later than it's ever been here in Fort Worth ISD on Friday, June 18th, as we started a little bit later, getting ready to open classrooms safely. And I mean, our teachers have just been our superheroes this year. We can look to national research and data that shows that teachers are the single most important school-related factor to a child's success, more so than school facilities even are. But we don't even need to look to national research. We can look more locally in that teachers have transformed learning environments in our classrooms from in-person learning, which was how we had done schools for hundreds of years, to virtual platforms last spring. A feat that was never before been undertaken in our national education system. And teachers had to assess not only the academic needs of kids during this time, but also the social emotional impact of COVID, not only to them as little people in our worlds, but their families too, and how that trauma carried over into what they brought back into the classrooms. And when you walk these hallways, it is noticeably quiet as kids are testing this week. And you can see too that the procedures that are being taken to keep our kids and our teachers safe are just tremendous. We got to celebrate Teacher Appreciation Week in early May. When I was a teacher, I think we got one day, Teacher Appreciation Day. So I'm really glad to see that it has been extended to a full week, and maybe we can extend it to a month.
Should
at some
be more
point.
at this point.
Absolutely.
It's the least we can do. And Read Fort Worth felt grateful to, in our own small way, partner with local foundations and 6 Fort Worth businesses to be able to provide our Treats for Teachers event during that week, so that they could get a tasty cookie, tea, coffee, or something like that, but to make sure that we were sharing our kindness and appreciation to all of our teachers across Fort Worth. So want to talk a little bit about what we're doing for teachers in the district, particularly as it relates to the teacher incentive allotment. The district released a video on this last week that's gotten a lot of attention and conversation in our community. So tell us more about the timeline and plans for that.
Well, we're very excited about this opportunity. House Bill 3 allowed for what is called the TIA, the Teacher Incentive Allotment, and that allows us to keep our best teachers in the classroom. Many of us know that for professional promotion and moving up in individuals' careers, that oftentimes that takes teachers out of the classroom. We want to be able to compensate them at high levels and have them remain in the classroom. We believe that with the teacher incentive allotment dollars from the state, we will see $100,000 salary teachers, keeping our best teachers in our schools, and particularly with our students in the greatest need. We are moving forward with this plan in 2021. The TEA, the Texas Education Agency timeline, sets up this upcoming year as a data capture year, where we will implement the plan soon thereafter in a pilot format. Soon thereafter, we'll have 3rd through 8th grade math and reading teachers based on the assessment from the MAP. The year after that, in 23, we'll include kindergarten 2nd math and reading, and 8th graders as well. And then we'll get to the high schools the year after that in 24 with Algebra 1, English, and also all remaining tested content areas, grade 3 through 12. We will continue with this schedule and move as quickly as we can based on the guidelines provided to us by TEA. But really want to thank the leadership, Kevin Bueller at Read Fort Worth for his guidance with me. We talked about the McKinsey study that talked about performance management, and that really is the best way to lead and improve. We have 5,600 teachers in Fort Worth ISD, and when employees perceive and recognize an incentive program as being fair and being accessible, it certainly will be that. And we are moving forward swiftly, but we want to move forward with great care because we cannot accomplish anything meaningful without the teachers leading the charge.
Wow, that's great to hear. $100,000 salaries for some of our teachers. I mean, I know Mayor Price, you'll agree. Wouldn't it be a great day when our teachers are on the same level as local lawyers and doctors? We know that their job certainly is that challenging and valuable to our community and our workforce. And I've heard you talk about teachers as well. Tell us a little bit more about what's on your mind related to the excellent teaching we see in Fort Worth ISD.
I'm thrilled to see the teacher allotment. For far too long, we've treated our teachers like it used to be considered more of a part-time job. Mothers taught while their kids were in school. This is a long time ago, folks. Remember, I'm getting old, but we never upped the salary to follow that. And I think as the demands have gotten higher and higher, I'm thrilled to see this happening. 100,000 plus would be amazing for teachers, and it would attract even more people into the field at a time, Kent, when I know you struggle to attract enough teachers and to keep them here. So first and foremost, I think we want teachers to know that they are the most critical asset that we have and that they are tremendously appreciated. Just ask any father or mother who's been at home with kids during COVID and had to sub in as their teacher, even if they were online. The parents have to see that it's getting done and have to manage their own job and their children. Ask them how much. They'll tell you real quickly. But I've been out talking to teachers. I run into them all the time when I'm out. Now that we're out and about more for dinner and luncheons, you'll run into more of them. And mostly they want to be back in the classroom full time, and they want their kids back. They want to be able to look in a child's face and say, Johnny's struggling with this, or Susie's struggling with this, or okay, Susan got this just right immediately, and they know who they can and can't move on. And that's incredibly frustrating for them on Zoom and on this hybrid model where they're trying to teach some remote, and some of those will stay. Kent and I've talked about that before, but the hope is, I think, from the teachers that long-term they'll have dedicated virtual teachers,
Right.
and they'll be able to have their precious kids back in the classroom. And I think Reed Fort Worth knows that the data shows we got to get them back.
Well, I think parents probably couldn't agree with you more, Mayor. When living rooms became classrooms and every every parent became a homeschooling parent, the significance of this job of teacher was lived in real time in the homes across our city. And if we took our teachers for granted before, we will never do that again. As parents played a bigger role in the education of their kids when schools turned virtual last spring. And prioritizing teacher quality has never been more important as we elevate and recognize the professionalism that that profession really requires. This provides a nice segue, and it was mentioned by both of you, a transition to returning to in-person learning this fall. And I know it's been something that both of you have talked about. Virtual learning and the use of technology in education will never go away. That'll be a part of how we do business going forward, that technology is a solution in some components to how we educate our kids. And it's something too that families have become accustomed to, the flexibility that it provides, the different learning modes. And we know that the data supports that our youngest learners really benefit the most from face-to-face instruction, especially those preschool, kindergarten, first and second graders. And both of you have been supporters of that. I've heard you talk about it at your school board meeting. Superintendent and mayor has taken some action on this too. We want to make sure that our families feel that they are empowered, that schools are safe, and the most academically and developmentally enriching environment for their kids. And we've heard nationally the term kind of school hesitancy used as parents are maybe reluctant about a return to classroom. So let's talk a little bit about that. Returning our students to classrooms this fall has been a priority of yours, Mayor, and something that you've spoken on, maybe one of the first people to speak on it at your State of the City. Tell us why this has been such an important issue to you.
You know, it's just makes sense when you think about it. 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, all the way up through 7th and 8th grade really need an adult with them to learn. Virtual learning just isn't working for our kids. And that isn't just something we think is happening. The data shows that it's just not working. And it's incredibly hard for parents to have that responsibility of the day-to-day education of their child, even though there's a teacher doing the lessons. It just isn't working. So it becomes critical. It also means we have less kids on the street when they're in school. And child abuse went up with virtual learning. Just the stress for families and the stress for caregivers was incredible. You know, recently, about 2 weeks ago, Kent and I and the county judge, Glenn Whitley, had an opportunity to gather the superintendents from all our school districts and most of the mayors around to send a letter to the Board of Education Director, Mike Morath, or the Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, stressing that we believe in-person learning is by far the best way for the kids to go. And he's got the data. He can follow that and know. So we've continued to be outspoken, and I think that's critical that we work on that and that we get that message across. And I think parents have to come to that realization too. Most of them have, but the schools are safe. If you'll look at the data on the spread of COVID, early on, there was some spread in the schools, but not so much now. We're all down to where it's not spreading like it was, and it certainly isn't at the schools. Our schools are safe. Our teachers are vaccinated, the large majority of them. Kids 12 and older will be vaccinated shortly. But we need the full community, not just parents, to say, get them back in school, or not just teachers. We need our faith-based group. You asked at my faith-based cabinet back in the spring or summer for them to preach from the pulpit in August, a return to school sermon. Touching families and saying, we believe this is the best place for them. And I think that's really got to happen. So we are going to try to hit this at every angle we can and say, get our kids back in school. So Fort Worth ISD's got a substantial number of children who just didn't return this year. they're young kids.
Mhm.
And that worries me for the future of Fort Worth, for our workforce.
Mhm.
So it's time this community, Reed Fort Worth, the school, the city, the churches, the synagogues all stepped up and said, let's get our kids back in school, because it really is a safe place for them to be. And the data is just showing that it's not working at home.
Yeah. And we know how important those messages to parents are when they come from a trusted voice, somebody that the parent puts their trust in. And our faith-based leaders, as you mentioned, are trusted voices in our neighborhoods and communities. And so appreciated the opportunity to come to your faith-based cabinet and make the request if they would consider having a back-to-school sermon Sunday on Sunday, August 1st. I'm encouraging their families to enroll if they hadn't been enrolled this year and come back in person.
And many of them will. They
Mhm.
really like partnering. And then most of
great.
our faith-based communities leaders are focused on their children.
That's terrific. Okay, Superintendent Scribner, how is Fort Worth ISD getting this message out to parents about enrollment, that school is safe, and doing all that they can to mitigate any feelings that parents might have around a hesitancy to come back to school in the fall?
Well, to the earlier point that we did see a drop off on in enrollment, and primarily our youngest learners.
Mhm.
So parents chose during the pandemic, because pre-K and kindergarten are not mandatory.
Mhm.
We saw higher percentages of families keeping their youngest students home.
Mhm.
So when we take a look at where Fort Worth ISD compares, certainly with our other peer urban districts, we did see a significant drop off, like each one of them did, and we're about in the middle of that range. Now, certainly the percentages are a bit different in the suburbs here in Tarrant County, but we were looking apples to apples, urban districts to urban districts. We are all suffering from the same challenges. Again, our socioeconomic challenged families, our economically disadvantaged families, and our youngest learners, we see a great drop off. What we have going now is we've launched a pre-KK enrollment campaign. Wanting students to register, really reaching out. We've reorganized our parent partnership work and have cross-functional teams that are focused on recapturing students. And the beautiful thing about this work, it's certainly targeting the youngest learners, but many of them have siblings. So when we identify a family, we're not only talking about the kindergarten, the pre-K, or the first grader, but any older siblings in the house. When I walked up and down the halls here and visited a few classrooms, there's great energy, there's great culture and climate, and students do belong in school. Now, we've learned a lot through the pandemic, and we can use technology as a supplement to in-person instruction, but clearly our data does bear that out, that the students who are participating in person achieved at higher rates than students who are participating virtually from home. Now, there are some exceptions, gifted and talented students at the high school level. We didn't see much of a difference there, but in general, the students who are in the developmental years who need the most attention, we really believe in person is the way to go. And to the mayor's point, we have not seen COVID numbers increasing in our schools. Community spread out in the community is one thing, but what's happening in the schools is quite a bit lower. In fact, we didn't have to close one school as a result of COVID. Due to an outbreak in in-person instruction. We're proud of that, following those protocols, and we think we can continue with 100% in-person invitation as we move to August. And I thank you for the faith-based initiative, and we certainly want to participate in that and get the voice out loud and clear.
Terrific. Well, wow, not having to close a single school all year because of a COVID outbreak, that is a tremendous accomplishment. And I know that the letter that Mayor mentioned with the county mayors and superintendents echoes the point that you made, that virtual can be supplementary, but in person should be the primary mode of instruction for our kids, especially our young kids. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the numbers here. Enrollment was mentioned, and Fort Worth ISD, like all of the districts in our county, have seen a decrease in enrollment. It was about 7% in Fort Worth ISD, and as Superintendent Scribner said, I think the percentage is almost 40% of that 7 was in those youngest grades, preschool, kindergarten, and first grade. And at the beginning of the year, it was about a 50-50 split of kids opting for in-person learning and then those opting to learn virtually. And now it's more 60-40, where we have more kids back in our classrooms than learning virtually. And then we got some big dollar signs too that we're going to talk about with the federal funding in the 3 different relief packages. And the biggest number announced most recently that the district will receive up to $261 million from the ESSER 3 funding. So let's talk about the enrollment piece. So Superintendent Scribner, does Fort Worth ISD have a good understanding of what it's going to take to get these kids back and steps that they're going to take in addition to what you mentioned with pre-K enrollment to address those other grades? The pre-K piece is something I know you do every year, but specifically kind of how we're addressing the enrollment decline that may have been the result of some school hesitancy or COVID specifically.
Yeah, I think it's a continuation of the previous conversation. I mean, really, we're talking about all hands on deck. When I came to Fort Worth, I think I was still on the tarmac at DFW when Mayor Price, her number showed up on my cell phone and said, "We need to get this thing moving." And pandemic has changed everything. However, in this year of recovery, in this year of demonstrating resilience, reimagining education, I think that the strategies of parent partnership and community outreach. Many of you are familiar with our Parent University program that was developed by Marta Plata, super successful principal. Well, now she's taking that to scale district-wide. We really want to help parents gain the social capital to understand how to continue their own education, but also reinforce the importance of education for our youngest learners. And we think that is a great opportunity to collaborate with Reed Fort Worth, repurposing our current staff in cross-functional teams to focus on recapturing students, and to the point of not only where we did see the biggest drop-off pre-K, K, first grade, but expanding that to siblings and bringing students back. Fort Worth serves a student population like most urban districts where 85% of our students are economically disadvantaged. So we're going to have to use different strategies than are used in some of our more affluent pockets. So we really think this is going to be an all hands on deck effort with our nonprofits, with our philanthropic community, and with our elected leadership as well. That's
great. I love to hear that. And again, if we can get the message out from lots of different entities, especially those most trusted by families. And Mayor, I love that, before Superintendent Scribner's, shoes and wheels are even down from the plane, you're putting a sense of urgency on him about the importance of education. So as we're getting ready for kids to come back in the fall, we want to make sure they're entering classrooms as ready as possible to learn, and how we're maximizing their time in the summer. We know it's a shorter summer this year than it has been before, but how we're taking advantage of the summer and those days. So Mayor Price, what would you like to see in terms of strategies regarding students returning to school this fall?
Well, Kent's right, and he's done a beautiful job here, and we really have hounded him from the city side. And for 10 years, I've focused on education because it's critical to the health of the city. It touches every single thing we do, and it's trite to say, but it is our future. It's whether Fort Worth will have the jobs, the skilled jobs, the high-paying jobs, the living salaries that people want depend on whether we have the workforce. And we have to catch these kids and get educated. So what I want to see is Reed Fort Worth, and we started it several years ago, about the time Kent came, I guess, or shortly thereafter. It's a collaborative effort for the community, and we want to raise that up, and I love that engagement piece. Last year, Reed Fort Worth helped by getting out and doing porch visits. In the August heat, you made, I think, nearly 400 families you reached out and touched, brought books, brought literacy material to them, talked to them about getting their kids in school. We'll continue those this year. And sometimes that's all it takes, not a teacher or not somebody from the admin building, but a community partner showing up, giving them a phone call and showing up and saying, can you get your kids back in school? It's safe to have them in school, and here's some material to help them get going. I think those porch visits are a tremendous way. I think that partnership, getting the message out, but we have to mitigate people's concerns about returning to school, the school hesitancy. I think we're getting there. I think the vaccination message, the no mask, and Kent mentioned that be coming as a policy from the schools before long. All of those are going to help us get there. But it's a huge kudos to Fort Worth ISD for your summer launch that you're doing that you mentioned earlier. And the city will be following right along with summer camps to supplement that. So it's all hands on deck at this point.
Okay, well, I hear you making a call to action to a couple groups here. The business community as education is a workforce development issue, I hear you saying, and then Read Fort Worth too to step up to the plate this summer in terms of mobilizing the community to get out to those families that need us the most.
That's
Okay.
correct. Let's get after this.
And I know, Superintendent Scribner, that you have some exciting summer plans to announce this today, maybe today it's going to be hot off the press or they've been announced already. Can you tell us about this summer program and how it's different than some of the other summer instruction the district has done, how it's going to help kids recover from the pandemic?
Well, again, the stigma of summer school has always been for those students who have fallen behind or have not passed a class. Given the pandemic and that this is a year of recovery, we want to start right now. We are very grateful for the federal dollars that are coming in that'll cover the next 4 summers in 3 years. But in addition to that, we think we can get started before those dollars are even released. We want to provide summer opportunities, summer launch for learning, as I said earlier, from kindergarten through the 12th grade, in person only for kindergarten through the 8th grade, and then in person or virtual at the high school level. And again, this is not a remediation, but rather an acceleration. We recognize that that the remediation work that we've done for decades has not resulted in the outcomes that we want to see. So focusing on solid Tier 1 instruction across the board in our regular school day, but particularly in the summer school. We won't finish this school year, as you mentioned, until June the 18th. So we'll take a quick respite. Our teachers have been working very, very hard, and then we'll get back right after it for summer school, full day. In the mornings, we will have structured literacy and mathematics, in the afternoon enrichment, but the enrichment courses will be STEM and will be CTE opportunities that have literacy embedded into those instructions, into that instruction, as well as several will have mathematics where appropriate. But we're looking forward to a fun summer for everyone. It is a new way of looking at it, and it's very, very excited about this initiative.
That's great. Exciting to hear that it's available for all kids, Monday through Thursday, and that the focus too on making sure that we're infusing the joy of learning into our summer experiences, that it's seen as an opportunity rather than punitive. Right. I mean, all that's terrific. So a big message to parents and families out there that want to get their kids involved. Over 80 sites, I think I heard. So lots of locations across Fort Worth. Okay, so my colleagues here, Mayor and Scribner, probably know these numbers, these dollars that I'm going to be mentioning, but just so our viewers kind of have a sense of the different funding buckets and how they are different, because the price tag can sound large, but based on if they're federal, local, or state dollars, there are some differences connected to each of them. So probably the number that people have heard most recently, because it was announced just a couple of weeks ago, was the $261 million from the ESSER 3 funding. There are 2 previous ESSER funding packages, 1 and 2, and those $1 and about $29 million that Fort Worth ISD received, and then the $2 are still pending distribution. And these dollars are really meant, as Superintendent Scribner talked about, to accelerate, to boost learning, and to really kind of give a lifeline to kids to spur them on the path of academic recovery. And so they're meant to really be spent not to supplant operating dollars, but really, again, in those ways that it boost or accelerate learning. And you can spend them over about 3.5 years because they're retroactive. And so for a district's budget that's approaching or just over $1 billion or so, just want to provide some context to kind of how far that $261 million gets you. And then there's local dollars through TRE that was passed, about $66 million. And then the state of Texas defended this legislative session, the dollars to House Bill 3 that was passed in our previous session 2 years ago. That was really historic and unprecedented education legislation that provides money for districts if they choose to adopt different education initiatives. And Superintendent Scribner talked about one of those earlier today when he was mentioning the teacher incentive allotment and funding available from the state of Texas through House Bill 3. but those dollars come to districts if you opt in for the various different initiatives. So just wanted to kind of lay out the different money amounts you might have been hearing and how they are different. But there is kind of no getting around the fact that this is historic money to our school district and money that we might not see in our district. You know, haven't seen it before, might not see it again. And time and money are often cited as barriers to, you know, why we don't or aren't able to kind of put in place or try some of the things that we want. I've heard asked a number of times this magic wand question, you know, if money were no obstacle, what would you do? And that question isn't entirely true today because, again, this isn't all the money in the world, but it certainly is more money than the district has had before, and it's an unprecedented amount of money. And so thinking kind of about these dollars and how they might be best spent. Mayor, you, I know, have been involved in conversations at the city and the county, because city and county are also getting big dollar amounts from these federal stimulus packages. And I think we have a lot to learn and can learn a lot from our cross-sector partners and apply those learnings to an education context. So I'm curious, Mayor, to hear from you what learnings you're seeing in these other sectors in terms of how they're thinking about at a city and county level, and that we might be able to apply to our thinking about how we spend these at a district.
Well, I think it's heartening to see. It's a little bit nerve-wracking when we think about how we're going to pay back for all this, our children. But besides that, it's heartening. It's the first time in a long, long time that I can remember that the federal government has really sent down a lot of our tax dollars that we're paying back to our schools, with a strong focus on our schools and back to our cities. The city alone's receiving 174 plus million. Our goal is, where the guidelines are just coming out, we're just getting those, and our goal is to get this aid to our citizens who really need the help. This isn't about balancing city budgets or anything. This is taking the money like we did with the first CARES dollars and getting it back in the hands of businesses, with helping parents, with broadband projects, with convention center project that will employ more people as we begin to bring conventions, put a lot of these children's parents back to work. I just think there's a golden opportunity for us to be a good example and use that for our kids. I think we mentioned earlier the broadband. A lot of our dollars will go back into broadband, and that in turn helps the youngest among us. Because this isn't about whether they're in school or not. We're all going to need broadband. We're all using these. And whether you're, you know, doing your homework or no matter what you're doing, you have to have broadband. It used to just break my heart to go by the high schools and see the kids sitting in the parking lot, or to buy Taco Bell and see them use the Taco Bell's internet to get their homework done. So we'll be focusing on things that will really help our families. But the other key piece is transparency. Families want to see where this money's going and be open and as transparent as you can, and letting them do letting them see what we're going to spend. And it's about bold changes. It's about taking that money and not continuing where we were, but rather making major shifts. Let's not repair what wasn't working for our kids to begin with. Let's start with something that will work, something that's bold, that this generation can really grasp on and really can learn. Let's bring all our stakeholders to the table. Let's get parents, the faith-based, the business community. Let's wake them all up and say, there's a lot of money out there in this community right now. And Reed Fort Worth is a great example of doing that. And I think as we begin the discussions, not just at the city, but certainly at the school, you got to have those people, those stakeholders at the table. I hope Reed Fort Worth will be a part of the conversation with the school district on how we spend this money. That's how we're going to get the real buy-in for the parents, that this money is going to be spent to improve their children's lives and their lives.
Okay, that's great, Mayor. So lots of transparency with the funding, as you're right. These are taxpayer dollars coming back to support kids here, and so being clear with parents about how we're putting those dollars to use. Okay, Superintendent Scribner, what are you and your team thinking about in terms of the priorities of how we spend these federal dollars within our district?
Well, to the mayor's point, I think absolutely this needs to be an iterative process with our community. The ESSER funding requirements are that we have community forums and receive community feedback from parents, from teachers, from principal, even from students. So we are in the process of scheduling those community forums so that they can help guide our decision making. We know also that this is a once in a lifetime, we hope, pandemic, but we cannot allow this public health crisis to turn into an educational crisis. We talked a lot in previous meetings, Elizabeth, about the students who came to Texas during the Hurricane Katrina, and it took 4 years for them to catch up from that lost year. Well, we don't have 4 years. We need to catch these students up immediately. The ESSER funds are significant, $260 million. We can spend it over the next 4 summers and 3 school years. We want to enhance early learning because we certainly are going to expect those students who did not attend last year, they didn't go anywhere. They will be coming back, and we're making great efforts to bring them back, having a literacy block in kindergarten and first grade. Middle school also is another area of focus for us, structured literacy and enhanced math. Given our student population and almost half of our students coming from homes where English is not the primary language, bilingual and dual language resources. And for some of our students, they haven't been in a school building for a year. And for those who are going from elementary to middle school or from middle school to high school, we want to make sure that they have the support. The social and emotional learning resources are there too, so we can transition those students and educate the whole child. Academics certainly are the focus, but if there is anxiety, if there is fear, if there are other emotional issues, then it's very, very difficult to get to the academic focus. So I think that the money and time, expanding the school day, expanding the school year, using technology for after-school programs, after-school tutoring, individual, small group in the evenings, on Saturdays. I think to the mayor's point, we're not going back to the way things were pre-pandemic. It's an opportunity for us to never let a good crisis go to waste and really leverage this so we can do something even better.
And your parent university that you're doing is a phenomenal piece of that. To fund that will make a big difference, especially in our English second language learners.
Absolutely.
We said that one of the themes today was going to be that it's the community's responsibility to stand up and support the recovery of our children. And Superintendent Scribner, you mentioned the social emotional supports that are going to be needed for kids. And I think that's an excellent example of where we can find community level solutions with our great pediatric hospital and medical care partners. We've seen great leadership from them in the last months as they have stood up vaccine dissemination across our community. And this doesn't all need to rest on the district and on our teachers. It's too much for them to do, to expect our teachers to both care for all of the social, emotional, and trauma needs of a child and their family and educate them academically. And so as we kind of connect back to that theme of community-wide solutions and it being all of our responsibilities, I think that's a great piece that you mentioned.
Yeah, we've had such good support from our medical community, and they can make a difference in parents getting their kids back in school. So often their doctor, their pediatrician is the trusted source. And if they don't have an individual doctor or pediatrician, many of them go to clinics, and those clinics, if they can help get the kids back in school and let them know that it's safe, it's going to be critical.
Yeah. And we have to do the same thing for our teachers too. Yes. As the emotions our teachers bring into the classrooms, they impact our children's ability to learn as well. I have a dear colleague that I work with who told me early on in the pandemic, shame on us if we do not let this opportunity go to waste. And, how can we make sure that we are standing up in this situation? What is best for kids, and shame on us if we do not. And I know that, none of us are blind or deaf to the skepticism and questions that we're hearing in our community about how we climb this big mountain that our kids have to overcome. Superintendent Scribner mentioned the hurricane and the multiple years it took kids to recover. And I just know, sitting beside both of you and what we have seen in Fort Worth over the last year, the summer porch visits in the heat of August, the teachers coming back to classrooms this fall are some of the many examples of how, if we're going to recover fast for our kids anywhere in this nation, it's going to be in Fort Worth, and it's not going to take the multiple years that it did after the Hurricane Katrina. And I often believe in just addressing the skepticism head on. How else can we do it? You've heard it, I've heard it. The numbers about decreased enrollment or literacy projections. The STAR assessment is being taken, last week by kids, and we'll know more about that. Stagnant growth in performance in Fort Worth ISD compared to other districts in the county. And I say that this is a question for all of us, because again, it doesn't just rest on the district. You are a critical partner in this, and it can be our community's responsibility. So to all of us, the question is going to be, what are the specific ways that we are going to address these challenges head on? And I'll even offer to go first and to step up, because this is a question that we need to ask ourselves as citizens of Fort Worth, but also as representatives and leaders of the organizations that we are here representing. So as Read Fort Worth, we opened today's conversation saying that the purpose of today was to be solutions oriented and children centric in all of the actions and decisions that we make going forward to open schools strong in the fall. And that we have a responsibility for our children, both as adults and leaders in Fort Worth and as citizens and as representatives of the organizations that we are here today representing. And there's no escaping the significant role the district has, but the solutions can come from everywhere. If children are coming to school scared and hungry and lonely, like we talked about, they cannot learn. If you have ever sat with a little person who is hungry, there's no way that they're going to be able to learn when their basic needs are not met. And there have to be multiple pieces operating at equal strength to make this possible. Said simply, it's kind of all or nothing. We have to stand up the social emotional supports that we're providing to kids. We need to make sure that families are strong and resilient so that kids are going home to stable family environments. We have to double down on math and literacy in equal parts, and we have a great start with that, with the summer launch that Fort Worth ISD is doing this summer, and the Summer Scholars Collaborative that Mayor Price mentioned with Read Fort Worth. And it's going to require a combination of swift action, like what can we put in place immediately this summer, and it's going to be a long haul approach. We're going to have sustainable solutions. So in terms of those swift action things, we'll be back out there this summer visiting homes of 1,000 families who we've identified with Fort Worth ISD were not enrolled this year, but they were the previous year. And we want to prioritize those families to make sure we're answering any questions they have around why they might be hesitant to return to school and mitigating all those factors so that we can empower parents with the best choice for their kids. We held a county superintendent and mayor's meeting. And we brought them together on the issue of in-person learning. And we look to do that going into the future, as we know that there are going to be other issues that we may have more power in addressing as a whole county rather than individually, and that then no single district has to expend their own political capital to do what's right for kids. And you can save your political capital on other issues that you're going to need to take up more locally. And our Summer Scholars Collaborative, there's been a lot of conversation about evidence-based summer programs as ESSER funding can be used for that. There's been some legislation around how teachers in our schools of education can be the instructors for those programs. And we really have to give a huge shout out to the 16 plus community partners. The city is included in that, Boys and Girls Club, Clayton Yes, Girls Inc., YMCA, that have over like another 80 locations for kids this summer that are providing every day in their summer programs literacy. And I really like to give the example of Arte de la Rosa. They're a summer program that does art, but they know that literacy is important in their neighborhood. And so Read Fort Worth partners with them to have a daily literacy specialist coming in and doing literacy instruction there. And we do need to consider more instructional time. Maybe it's not necessary for all of our kids, but it certainly is for some of our kids. Fort Worth ISD has fewer minutes per day than other districts in our county. We have 435 minutes a day. Arlington is at 445, Crawley's at 465, 20, 30 more minutes a day than we do. And that puts our kids at a disadvantage, where over the course of a year, we're getting 12 fewer days of school than some of those other kids. And we really need to look at that and consider what's best for students in Fort Worth ISD. It also is going to require a long haul sustainable approach. And to do that, we really need our community partners. Read Fort Worth is partnering with TCU on an education vision paper to really lay out for the community and define the problem that we are facing. And we need our group of education allies, a coalition of cross-sector broad support that's going to stand alongside of us on these critical issues, so that we can advance issues that are most important for kids in their education system. So from a Read Fort Worth perspective, that's how we're taking swift action, and we're in this for the long haul too, knowing that it's going to take both. I'm really making sure that we're doubling down on having the data that we need to make informed decisions, that we have the coalition of broad sector education allies, and that we're building the structures now that can make sure that we're nimble and sustainable into the future, because good organizations are able to do that change and shift as time moves on, and that's going to require that for our kids right now. Okay, so Superintendent Scribner, I'm turning it over to you. What are you thinking about specifically in terms of how you're putting kids on the path, and how you're addressing some of the skepticism that we all have heard about what we're doing for kids in Fort Worth?
So this is my 19th year as a superintendent, and I am very familiar that there are pockets of skepticism in every community, and we see that here in Fort Worth. I know that there was some concern over some group of parents wanted the schools to be open immediately, and other didn't, and board members representing those communities. So I think it's this has been probably the most challenging leadership scenario that any of us have dealt with. I say we're operating in a 49-49 world with 49% on one side, 49% other percent, and the 2% of us in the middle really understanding how complex this is to implement. So what I would say with regard to the skepticism, two things. One is we have a what's called Let's Talk page on our website, where we gain input from communities with questions, concerns, suggestions, and we monitor that data. And the kinds of things that we're hearing with regard to masks and other things are not always what we're hearing in the aggregate. So there are some vocal pockets of skepticism. I think though too, it's important to understand where we began, because when we all met, we were, if we were looking at the third grade reading data, we were started at 29%. And pre-pandemic, we got it up to 35. I think the state average is 44. When we compare apples to apples and large urban districts to large urban districts, we see a range. I mean, San Antonio is down at 31, and Dallas, who has the performance management system that we're looking at, is up to over 40. So we do believe that that there are some opportunities for growth there. Also, in the aggregate, in 2017, our district letter grade score would have been a 67. In 1 year, we increased 8 points. In fact, Commissioner Morath recognized us as one of the top 2 urban districts in Texas with that growth. The following year, I think the Star Telegram called us tantalizingly close, missing being a B by 0.1%. And then the middle of the year data from just prior to the shutdown would have clearly had us in the B range, in 83 or an 84. So there's a lot going on there. But back to the question, what are we going to do? I think starting immediately as we finish strong, we still have 5 more weeks of instruction. So a lot of these things we're talking about are already being implemented. But come summer, not remediation, acceleration, focus on tier 1 instruction, learning in the fast lane is what we're calling it. We absolutely understand that in-person is going to be our requirement, and we're going to work very, very hard to get all students in person, have teachers have explicit goals and explicit standards, so that our students can make up that time. We don't want to be in the same boat as some of the other, the Hurricane Katrina example that we shared. We really think that here's an opportunity for us with these additional ESSER dollars, with a clear and focused effort. We can recover even more quickly than has historically been the case.
Mayor Price, we saw your unplugged version of yourself at the State of the City.
When you get to the end of your term, you get to be pretty unplugged.
Okay, so let's hear from you. what's your unplugged statement about how you want to make sure that we're coming back strong for our kids in the fall?
Well, my unplugged is exactly what I said earlier. Let's don't repair an education system that was questionable, whether it was working for our kids or not, particularly our kids in the urban areas. It's a different environment in the urban areas, but let's come bold and strong and come up with solutions that really fit today's children. Not just as a result of the pandemic, but really fit where we're going. Kent and I've talked about this before. These kids learn differently than you and I and Kent and our children did. They've just got to. But the real reality of it is this community must focus on education. When I started talking about it 10 years ago, people were like, you'll get voted out of office. The mayor's job's not education. Well, 10 years later, I'm still here. And it is, we're not the school board, not the superintendent, don't want to be, but we have to be your partners. And our goal has to be, we have to wake the community up to what's happening. And they have to hold our school board members and our superintendent's feet and our parents to the fire. And we need to be clear about what we're doing and what those goals really are, not just talk around the edges of this issue, but rather say, we want specifics and we want a specific timetable. We want transparency and trust, and you'll get that at Fort Worth ISD. But it behooves all of us to really step up as a community. T3, the Tarrant 2 and 3, from cradle to career, which they don't like as well as T3, but that's really what it is, a chance for children for parents to have the support and the education for their kids from birth to college and on to their career. I just think parents must know the data about their school, and they got to demand their schools are doing better. There are great teachers there. We got to pay them, as we talked about earlier, and we got to cut them loose and let them teach the way their children need to be taught in the classroom. But parents, know your data. Ask your school board member, ask your principal, show me the state data on my school. And if it doesn't work, demand it does work and move them to another school. And I think Reed Fort Worth is doing a beautiful job of helping wake the community awareness, doing porches, visits, the summer initiative that you're doing, our summer camps. It's going to take all the cooks on deck working hard on this, and it will take us continuing to keep that foot on it. And I'll be out of office soon, and I hope my predecessor will continue to focus on education. And I'm not, unfortunately, Kent, for you, I'm not going anywhere. So I'll stay around here and still be able to be a voice saying we got to do the right thing by our kids.
I know we have some questions in the chat box that we're going to write down and follow up with those answers since we're nearing time. And Mayor Price just said that she's going to be back, or she's going to stick around. There was a childhood song I used to listen to that didn't say, it said, you don't have to say goodbye, you can just say, see you later. And I think that that's going to apply to you, Mayor Price, that after a few long bike rides and some time with your grandkids, that you won't be out of the public eye for too long. And so we would be remiss not to take this opportunity to thank you for the leadership that you have given to Fort Worth as a whole and
Absolutely.
to Reed Fort Worth specifically. I know this probably feels like the longest goodbye ever, and you're on some sort of goodbye tour. But again, we could not pass up the opportunity to thank you for your leadership and the pulpit that you have used as mayor over these last 10 years to advance the conversation of education as a workforce development issue and as critical for our kids. You have been a consistent advocate for our children and a champion of education. And it's really quite remarkable to see a mayor do that in a city that is the 13th largest city in the nation, for you to use the pulpit that you have had to be such a continued voice of education and our children. And you have reminded all of us that we must remain determined and disciplined and persistent in this pursuit for our kids. And I know Superintendent Scribner and I look forward to stepping in to make sure we're carrying your work and legacy forward. And so on behalf of Reed Fort Worth, our board and our stakeholders and our staff, I'm honored to present to you the first ever Reed Fort Worth Literacy Champion and Education Innovator Award. And this award recognizes a person or an organization who advocates for children and champions literacy in our schools. We cannot think of a greater person to bestow this award upon and recognize you with it. And going forward, we'll do this annually to honor somebody or an organization who has been that advocate for children and a literacy champion. And we are honored to distinguish you with Mayor Betsy Price as our first ever award. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the leadership that you have given, and we will do our best to carry your baton forward.
Thank you. That means the world to me. It's been a labor of love, and we'll continue that. So to be recognized means a lot. Thank you both for that.
Thank you.
And to Read Fort Worth Board.
Well, we want to thank you to all of our viewers and guests today who were a part of our event. We know we have some follow-up for you in terms of how you can be a part of the solution. Our themes today were making sure that we were solutions-oriented, kid-centered, and communicated a clear message that it's our community's responsibility to step up for our kids. And we're going to need all of these pillars operating in equal strength for our kids to recover as fast as we want them to, and to continue to make Fort Worth the strong and proud community that each of us knows that it is and can be. So thank you again for joining us today. A special thanks to Dr. Scribner and Mayor Betsy Price for your time and insights. And thank you for all of you who joined us today. Be well. Take care. Goodbye.